Welcome, everybody, to AB Live. We are indeed down the rabbit hole on this Saturday night. Saturday night's all right for fighting, and it's all right for gaining insights and revelations. And that's what we do here at Aeon Byte. Welcome, everybody who are coming already into the chat room. Very excited tonight about the show. The first AB Live in a while, as I just got back from my adventures in the homeland of Portugal, the ancient land of the Lusitanians, the Galatians, the Moors, and all that. And I had some amazing experiences, both spiritual and intellectual, which I will share in time as I unpacked all the high weirdness that I had there. But it's good to be back in the empire, and it's good to get some perspective. So, with us, very excited to have someone whose work I really enjoyed. His book, Mythos and Cosmos, is a book that I go back to when it comes to astrotheology, mythology, and all those sort of lateral disciplines. He is an amazing mind, and I love his work, and that is Dr. John Lundwall. John, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been too long.
Thank you, Miguel. Thanks for having me. I am having some technical difficulties. Every time you speak, I get a double. I hear you twice. In fact, I'm hearing myself.
Really? Well, I think, no, I don't think anybody is. If you guys hear anything strange in the chat room, please let us know, because that is just technology. I think it might be this. Let me see if this fixes it. Let's see. Let's see. Whoa, I just lost John. I think that was an accident. Come back, John. I think he actually somehow came back twice with his account, so that's why he's getting the double feedback. So hopefully he'll get back to it. And with us too, we've got Nathan Lee being the co-pilot in our astrotheological adventure. Vance has some things that he needs to take care of it, so he won't be joining us. And but the occult fan will take care of business, so he won't be. Hey, John, you are back, and I think I hope that fixed it. People in the chat room on YouTube and Facebook said they did not hear any double voices or anything like that. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, but I hear you twice, about 7 seconds in separate. So somehow I'm getting I'm getting everything I say is repeated 7 seconds later. So everything you say, I get twice. So
that is very strange. I have never heard of this happening before. Well, we'll jump onto the presentation. That way, we'll put ourselves in mute.
Makes introductions quick.
You gotta roll with the technological punches. It's very simple. We can sit there and bark at the moon all night, all we want. So, yeah, I don't think I really have any house cleaning right now. Again, I am still pretty jet lagged. I'm still trying to get the kids and the house and the dogs and a sense of perspective. I'm still feeling the ayahuasca vibes from all the rituals I did there. So I'm still sort of getting. So I don't, any news or house cleaning I will do in our show on Tuesday when Eduardo Cano joins us to talk about the Anunnaki, and we'll do that. So why don't we just jump in? Oh, for the audience too, because John has a spanning presentation, we will not be taking audience questions unless you have a super chat or there's something important. But that will be the format tonight. And so please sit back and enjoy. John, why don't we just jump into it?
All right.
I will put myself on mute, and here we
go. Thank you. All right. Yeah. This is thanks for having me, Miguel. Sorry for the technical issues. I can't address that, but I'm actually hearing myself talk. Repeat.
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to fix that. I mean, I've never seen that happen. If you have, it's almost like you've got two things open, John. Is there another tab that you've opened somewhere?
Oh.
Two tabs of StreamYard that you might have open?
You know what? I just fixed it.
Yeah, he's a complete genius.
I had two tabs of StreamYard
That's
open.
yeah.
That's what it was. So, okay, thank you.
All right, we have overcome the demiurgic forces of human error. All right,
All right.
awesome.
Well, I'm just going to share what I've been doing for the past 5 years. It's a cultural astronomy project. I'm the project leader of the Utah Cultural Astronomy Project. It's a team of archaeologists, surveyors, photographers, rock art specialists, rock art researchers, astronomers, photographers. And we're basically surveying and filming ancient Native American sites within the state of Utah and showing or discovering, finding, sorting through what kind of astronomical relationships they have. And in so doing, we have made some spectacular discoveries. So this is the project. Just real quick, we do publish in peer-reviewed papers, journals. We've been in the American Indian Rock Art Journal, Archeoastronomy journals. We present to the Utah State Parks, Utah Rock Art Research Symposiums. One of the things we do is we help the state parks in Utah. Well, we help them with whatever they ask, but one of the things we've been able to do is help them with dark sky registrations. Utah has more dark sky spots registered with the International Dark Skies Association than anywhere else in the world. So there's some beautiful dark skies in Utah, and it's fun to do that. We also publish in popular venues. You know, last year we had a major spread in the ancient origins. We do podcasts, literary conferences, Comic-Con presentations, YouTube.
Wow, that's great. What is that dark skies? What do you mean by dark skies?
The dark skies is the IDA, International Dark Sky Association. Register with them, you have to go through a long series of technical things that you have to do. You have to measure how dark your skies are. So you're measuring for light pollution. You know, every town and city has electric lights, and that the light just goes up in the atmosphere and it dims the sky. And so if you live in a big city, most people who live near urban areas see very few stars in the sky at night, never really see the Milky Way. But if you live, you know, 100 miles away from a city, you still might get light glow, but your skies will be quite a bit darker. And if you live 200 miles away from a city, you'll actually be able to see thousands of stars at night and the nebulosity of the Milky Way. So dark skies is a natural resource. And I mean, just, you know, in the 1990s, LA had a blackout due to an earthquake, and it occurred at like 4 a.m. And because the power went out across the grid, people scampered out of their houses, and there were hundreds of calls to the fire department, to the observatory, as people were saying they think there's a gas leak in the sky, and what they were actually looking at is the Milky Way, because they had never seen it
Not
before.
an acid trip or something.
That's right. And so to see the Milky Way, or I mean, in a true dark sky, my goodness, I've seen the aurora borealis in Utah, of all things.
Wow.
I've seen goblins and sprites, shooting stars, meteors. You know, one of the things I've seen in southern Utah is the Zodiacal Light, which is very hard to see. But it turns out there's a band in the sky that the planets follow, the sun and moon. They're all in the same band in the sky. That's where your zodiac is. And as the planets orbit the sun, all the planets are on the same orbital plane except for Pluto, which is a dwarf planet now. But they leave dust particles behind as they move around the sun, and the sunlight will light up those dust particles. And so you get this band of light that goes across the zodiac. That's called the Zodiacal Light, and it's very hard to see, but I've seen it several times. And so there's actually two bands of light in the sky, the Milky Way and the Zodiacal Light. So this is what ancient peoples were looking at before urbanization and electric lights. And we've sort of lost that sense of the cosmos because we don't even see it anymore. Anyway, that's dark skies. I'm just going to introduce archeoastronomy in the American Southwest. It really begins in the 1970s. You've got here on your screen Chaco Canyon. Let me get a laser pointer up. This is Fajada Butte in the lower right. In the summer months, the sunlight spills into the canyon at sunrise, and the first thing that gets lit up is this butte in this beautiful golden color. It's probably one of the reasons why the ancestral Puebloans migrated and built there. It's the largest archaeological.
Hey, John, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing what slide number are you on?
I am.
Yeah, you're going to have to do another share screen. What are you seeing right now on your screen?
You're not. I'm seeing my slide, Chaco Canyon. You're not seeing that?
No. Try another share screen.
Okay, share screen.
All right, add to stream. Okay.
Am I up?
Yeah, that's yours. Okay, so what slide number are you on?
4.
Okay, for some reason it wasn't moving. Okay, 4 Chaco Canyon. Okay.
Well, now I'm restarting. I'm on Chaco Canyon. You got me?
Yeah, number 4. But it almost seems like try going back to 3. See if it moves.
Does it move back to 3?
No. I have control for some strange reason. Do you want to just let me know when you want me to change a slide?
Yeah, I added a few slides. That's the thing. So I've got a few slides in the slide deck you don't have. All right. Well, let's do that.
Yeah, for some reason. All right. I'm on slide number 4.
Okay. All right, Chaco Canyon. You got me? I'm not seeing it on the screen.
All right, there you go.
There you go. All right, so the lower right corner, you have that Fajada Butte. On top of Fajada Butte are these stones leaning against the cliff face. I've got in the top right corner. They don't let you walk up there anymore. I was there a couple years ago and I couldn't get up there. There's so many people that have walked to this site that just the foot traffic has settled the stones, and so the alignment is off because of that. So they don't let people up there anymore. The bottom left, you see those rocks leaning against the cliff face are 3 slabs of stone which have been altered by the ancestral Puebloans, and light streams through the cracks between the slabs and casts these light daggers on the petroglyphs carved underneath them. There's a couple spirals. The center picture there shows a light dagger going through the center spiral on summer solstice. The bottom left, the light frames the spiral at winter solstice. On the equinox, the light dagger is equidistant between the center and circumference of the spiral. This was discovered in the early 1970s by a woman named Anna Sofer. You know, she wasn't an archaeologist or an anthropologist. She was an artist. And, you know,
Wow.
she walked up there, she saw what was going on, and she recognized what was going on, the artist eye. And so it was she who notified academics, notified other people. She started a team. There was a lot of pushback, you know, maybe not. But they went and began filming this phenomenon. In the canyon, there are several pueblos and kivas, grand structures. I mean, Pueblo Bonito is the largest pueblo there, and it had over 800 rooms. It was the largest building in North America until Chicago started to build apartment buildings in the very late 1800s. So it's a massive complex. And as they began looking at those, do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Slide 5.
This is one of the pueblos with the kiva in front of it. As they began measuring those, they began realizing that the entire site is astronomically aligned in many different ways. Many of the walls of the pueblos line up to the sunrise or sunset on key days, solstices, and equinoxes. Surprisingly, many of them line up to lunar positions, especially the lunar standstill cycle called the Metonic cycle. The moon goes through an 18.6 year cycle where, I mean, basically, if you watch a moonrise on the horizon in a specific time, in a specific phase, the next time the moon will rise at that same spot on the horizon in the same phase, same time as 18.6 years later. So it has this 18.6 year cycle, which they were tracking, which is really interesting because there's no agricultural reason to track that. So it has to be a religious reason that they're tracking it. So they have lunar alignments, solar alignments. So the entire site is astronomically aligned. In this picture, the upper left, I'm there about a week before summer solstice, and the sun is just now poking through one of the windows at sunset. That big round kiva in front of you is their worshiping space. There's several kivas per pueblo. They're built subterranean. You find them at Mesa Verde. You find them amongst the ancestral Puebloan. It's the connecting point between the worlds, between the divine other world and this world, where they perform their rituals and bring up the divine powers from the eternal. Do you want to hit the next slide? So that was Chaco Canyon. This picture here is a picture of Clear Creek Canyon. It's the bluff of Clear Creek Canyon. It's in south central Utah. And this is where I spent 2 years doing my work. The canyon runs east-west there on the right side of the screen. It's about 3 miles long. But all those rock bluffs you're looking at, I am across the canyon valley on an opposing rock bluff, are thousands of petroglyph and pictograph images, over 3,600 images.
Wow.
And so this is a major Fremont site. So hit next slide. Yeah, so one of the slides I added was describing who the Fremont are. Most of our work is studying the ancient Fremont Indian. They live in Utah, parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, the Four Corners area from about 300 to 1300 CE. That early date, it's probably earlier than 300 CE. The problem is it's not a homogeneous culture. There's numerous tribes and villages all over this landscape. We don't know if they speak the same language. They have different trade networks, so slightly different cultural complexes. But what unites them is they have a similar rock art style. Their anthropomorphs have trapezoid bodies, and we're going to be looking at a lot of those, so you'll see what I'm talking about. They wear moccasins. All the Pueblo Native Americans wear sandals. And so this is farther north in Utah, where moccasins are more practical because you do get snow in these high desert valleys in Utah. They live in pit houses. So unlike Chaco Canyon, which had these mammoth Pueblo constructions, big walls, hundreds of rooms, a Fremont village will consist of 20, 30 pit houses, which is a 10 to 20 foot diameter hole dug 3 or 4 feet into the ground, and then it has a lattice work of posts and adobe over top of it. And they make grayware pottery. We don't know what they called themselves. They're called the Fremont Indian because one of the first villages of this culture type was excavated by the Fremont River, so that's the name they get. And so we know very little about them. But here we have a petroglyph in this Clear Creek Canyon. 5 years ago, I began this study. So I'm a founding board member of the Utah the Utah Valley Astronomy Club. So it's a bunch of, I would say, amateur astronomers, but there are several people in the club that have massive observatories in their backyard. And the pictures they take are better than Hubble. I mean, it's unbelievable, the technology that's out there now. And so anyway, Fremont Indian State Park called us and said, we need someone to come down and help us register for dark sky status and run a star party. So I just happened to be the guy that volunteered. I went down there with my telescope. I was there for 3 nights, giving public star parties, star tours. It's one of the things I do. And during the day, I just hiked the paths and looked at the petroglyphs. I didn't know anything about the Fremont. I didn't know anything about their rock imagery. I was just enjoying it. And it just so happens that I walked up to this panel at the right moment, because I walked up right when a light shadow phenomenon was going right through the middle of it. Had I been there an hour earlier, I wouldn't have seen it. The panel would be all in shadow. Had I been there an hour later, I wouldn't have seen it. The panel would be all in sunlight. It was just luck that I walked up and witnessed this. And the other thing that was interesting to me about this petroglyph, it's a geometric shape. The 3,600, 3,700 images, most of them are animals, sheep, elk, deer, tons of anthropomorphs, people, deities, headdresses. Wow. There's plant motifs. But this was something new. This was, oh, now I see everyone. This has a circle divided into 12 wedges. In the lower left, one of the wedges has 11 lines in it. And the adjacent wedges each have 1 line. That's 13 lines. That's a lunar number. 12 wedges is a solar number. And, look, I'm just a astronomer geek. And I just happen to know that the difference between a lunar year, a synodic lunar year, and a solar year is 11 days. So when I walked up and I counted the 12 wedges and I counted the 11 lines, I thought, are they reconciling a lunar solar calendar? That would be rather sophisticated for something like this. And then next slide. That's when I know. And I've kind of painted it, but for an hour during the day, there's a little ledge of rock right above this image. And as the sun reaches its zenith, the ledge casts a shadow over the entire panel. But then as the sun moves west, there's a little dip in the ledge, and it allows for a triangle of light to climb up from the ground, and it goes up through the center of the wheel. And in fact, I've got 3, go back to the previous slide if you can, Miguel.
Sure.
In the center of the wheel, you see this big depression. That's a cupule. They've pecked it out using another rock, a harder rock. Mm-hmm. And then down in that wedge with 11 lines, there's a cupule, and to the left of it, there's another cupule. And if you look around, actually to the left of the entire petroglyph, there are some cupules. So they've pecked these cupules. Go back to the next slide. At the summer solstice, the tip of this triangle, this is all filmed, but I'm not showing it. Hopefully the film I do have later we'll be able to watch. The tip of the triangle comes up and touches the lower right cupule. Then it rises up and touches the center large cupule. And then it rises up and ends at this top hole. Do you see that at the very top? I've highlighted it. So to me, that seems significant. So I began filming this. Actually, when I saw this happen, I called a friend of mine, John McHugh. He's my research partner. He's a licensed registered archaeologist in Utah. And we formed this study group, which has grown into a pretty large team at this point. And we've got 5 years under our belt and have discovered 6 major calendar panels through Utah that are original to our team. So it's really quite exciting.
Mhm.
But what they did on this panel is summer solstice, that triangle of light that I've painted in yellow, comes up, touches the bottom right cupule, goes through the center, ends at the top hole. On halfway between solstice and equinox, the triangle of light has shifted to the left, and the tip touches the bottom left cupule, center cupule, top hole. And then on equinox, it actually shifts all the way to the left of the panel, and it goes almost horizontally, but at about a 50-degree angle, and it goes up. I wish I had my laser pointer so I could point it out, but it transects through the middle of the petroglyph differently. So they're using this panel from equinox to summer solstice back to equinox. That's their growing season. That's their agricultural cycle. March equinox to summer solstice to fall equinox. 7 lunar months. That's their entire agricultural cycle. They are harvesting in September and October. They are returning the fields. So that is then becomes an agricultural calendar. And if you look at it, actually the entire image, the wheel, the entire thing is a phallus. Do you see that?
Yeah, that's people were mentioning that in the comments section. Is anybody going to bring this up?
Well, actually, right above is an anatomically correct phallus and testes, right above the wheel. Again, I wish I had my laser pointer, but it's ejaculating, and the ejaculation is intersecting 2 men who have erect phalluses. The entire thing is a fertility panel. So you don't look at rock art unless you're willing to look at a lot of penises and vaginas, because they're everywhere, right? It's fertility imagery. Yeah. And so this is an agricultural cycle. And on this point, I should just point out the primary purpose of this petroglyph and the way they've carved it to catch the sunlight isn't a calendar. That's its secondary purpose, or maybe its tertiary purpose. The primary purpose is at the right time of the year, the image is cosmicized by the sunlight. And again, I inserted a slide which you don't have, but this top hole at the very top is different than the cupules. The cupules have been pecked out with rock. That top right hole at the very top has been drilled. They took a bone or a stick and they rotated it and they drilled it into the rock face. And to the right of the petroglyph are several more drill holes. And we didn't know why. Some holes were drilled and some holes were pecked. And so one of our ideas in that top hole, and the stick casts a shadow. Would the shadow then do anything on the petroglyph? And so we put a stick in there and filmed it through the year. And it took me a couple months to realize, oh my goodness, when you put a stick in that hole, the very first thing that lights up on this entire rock face is the tip of the stick, right? It's out from the rock face. And when the sun rises on the horizon, the tip of the stick gets illuminated.
Right.
So if you put a feather, a prayer feather or a prayer bead on a stick and you put it in these holes, you now are blessing and causing the prayer feathers and the prayer beads at that time of year. So at summer solstice, you could imbue a ritual artifact, a prayer feather, a prayer bead on a stick on this panel with the power of Father, Son. And then you would take that bead and feather, you put it on your ritual regalia, your costume, your flute, your drum, and now that has the power of the sun. And so it is, our leading theory is the drilled holes held prayer sticks, prayer feathers, prayer beads, which means the panel was decorated with different feathers and beads as they performed their ritual. And the primary purpose of the panel then is a ritual fertility purpose, and the secondary purpose is a calendar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is fascinating.
All right, next slide.
Next slide.
Okay. This is called Five Finger Ridge. This is where the village of the Fremont was located. It has 5 knobs. That largest hill on the left used to be about 3 or 4 times that size. So let me tell you the tragic story of this. In 1984, this highway right here is Interstate 70, and it was being built. And that entire hill was scheduled for demolition. They were going to bulldoze the silt out of the hill to use as road base for the highway. And of course, as they began doing that, they began running into Native American artifacts. So the entire project was stopped. This is a federal highway project. It was stopped. Archaeologists from Brigham Young University were called down, and they were essentially given 60 days to do an excavation. Now, the rules have changed, but in 1984, you had 60 days.
It's insane.
It is insane. And so what happened is the majority of that hill got bulldozed, and the majority of the village is now underneath Interstate 70. So it's lost. But as you can imagine, that created such an uproar nationally, internationally even, and certainly locally in Utah, that the silver lining to the story is Utah made this site a heritage state park, built a museum, and then has been overseeing it ever since, which means more has been preserved than would have been, despite the loss of the hill and the village. So now it's a heritage park with full-time park rangers that oversee the site, oversee the petroglyphs, a great museum with the artifacts. And so anyway, just so you know, this is how a lot of archaeology is done. And that's not just, that's global. Generally, things aren't found unless someone's digging a utility trench or a foundation for a building. A lot of Fremont archaeology is done simply in this way. Road crews run across something. Now the rules are if you run across something, everything has to stop, and you have to either come up with an alternate plan or have a total complete excavation. I mean, there's a lot of rules now that weren't before. All right, next slide.
All right, next slide.
Okay, so this is a 3D image of the canyon. And so this is where it starts getting really interesting as far as our research goes. One of the first things we did is we took the archaeology reports and we surveyed the canyon. We figured out the length of it, all the orientations of it, and then we wanted to plot out where all the petroglyphs and rock art were located. And to our astonishment, there's 2 sides to this canyon. The canyon runs east-west, so there's a north side of the canyon and south side of the canyon. All the petroglyphs are carved on the north side of the canyon, all of them. We walked the south side of the canyon miles, could not find a single petroglyph. There is a rock cave shelter on the south side called Cave of 100 Hands. You see cave with pictographs painted. A pictograph is painted, a petroglyph is carved. And so there are pictographs of hands in that cave. That's the only rock art on that side of the canyon, except there is a pictograph of a Native American blanket that was probably created in the 1900s by a Native American. So that it's not ancient. So what we then realized is all the rock art is on one side of the canyon. Why would they do that? There's plenty of rock faces on the other side of the canyon. I don't know why they're doing that. So we began taking azimuth readings. Every panel, every rock face that had rock art on it, we'd stand in front of it with our backs to the rock art and take a sighting compass and just take a reading as to what direction the petroglyph was facing. Okay. And we did that. We didn't do it for all 3,600 petroglyphs, but for thousands of them. And what we discovered is they're all facing south. Almost all are facing southward, between southeast, south, southwest. There's a few dozen facing east and west. We found 2 facing north. out of 3,700. To us, this seemed like a methodology. This is there, there's the rock faces turn and twist. You can pick a rock face facing any direction on the north side of the canyon, but they're picking the ones oriented southwards. And if so here I have a picture in northern latitudes, it's the sun that is declined southwards. So then our leading theory is they're orienting the rock imagery to the sun. It's a form of sun writing. And again, that feeds into the idea that when the sunlight touches the image, it becomes alive. It becomes cosmicized. In fact, in the ethnography of the later Pueblos, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Tewa, the rock imagery, the tradition is that they're living beings. These depictions of anthropomorphs, these deities, are living beings sharing the power of the other world into the tribe. And so what better way to bring an image in rock art to life than to have it touched by father son, especially if it's aligned in a specific way to the sun through the year. And so then our leading theory is that they're oriented southwards towards the sun. As we've gone out of this canyon and have studied other areas through Utah, we still keep these azimuth readings. And so far, the methodology is consistent no matter where we go. About 90% of the rock art faces south, and about 9% faces east and west, and about 1% face north. And so that is a consistent methodology. Next slide. All right. So this is just for fun before I move on, but this is an amulet that was found in one of the pit houses at Five Finger Ridge. And my research partner, John McHugh, showed me a picture of it in the archaeology report and said, "What do you think that is?" And I said, "John, that's a lunar calendar." You have 2 crescents and a hole in the center, 13 circular depressions around it, and 19 notches on top. That's that metonic cycle. Every 19 years, the moon's rising in the same position, 13 months in a solar year, 13 lunar months in a solar year. The right crescent is the waxing moon. The center is the full moon. The left crescent is the waning moon. That is a depiction of your entire lunar cycle. So we actually just wrote a paper on this, and it's about ready for submission. Unfortunately, like in Chaco Canyon, you can go and measure walls, windows, and doors and specifically point to astronomical alignments. Well, you don't get to do that here in Clear Creek Canyon. The pit houses that have actually been recovered. So it's impossible to 100% prove this is a lunar calendar. But with this amulet was found turquoise that was sourced from New Mexico, Arizona, California, seashells from the Gulf Coast and the Pacific Coast, gaming pieces, which are traded at trade fairs. What that tells us is there were trade from the south, probably into Mexico, California, Nevada, and probably into the plains, right? And so there are trade networks that are going on, and surrounding Five Finger Ridge and Clear Creek Canyon are several ancestral Puebloan villages that were tracking the lunar cycle, this 19-year cycle. And we have pieces in the excavation we can source to those sites. And so that is our best argument. They have contact with these sites. These sites are keeping this lunar calendar. We have this amulet, and it's pretty convincing that it is the 19-year lunar calendar. Next slide.
All right.
Last picture for this canyon. This is another panel, and it's spectacular. It's this big 12-ringed spiral. I'm looking at the left picture. There's a big square sheep. Her nose is touching the tail of her foal. an offspring sheep. A spiral is emerging out of her back. So again, what happens here is on summer solstice, the sunlight starts at the top of the rock, and this sun shadow line just comes down and sweeps across the rock face. But if you notice on this bottom left picture, there's this little guy to the left of the big spiral. Do you see him?
Yeah.
He's got a feather headdress, 2 feathers, which are pointed towards the spiral. Do you see those?
Yeah.
Right on top of his head. The sun shadow line goes right between those feathers, touches the circumference of the spiral, bisects the spiral coming out of the back of the sheep. A few minutes later, it goes right through the center of the big spiral and bisects the horn in the sheep of that big square sheep. A few minutes later, it's touching the back end of that spiral and bisects the mother and a baby sheep. So that is purposeful. And then if you go there, it turns out on equinox, the sun shadow line is shifted, but they have still manipulated it. So this middle picture, when the sun shadow line goes through the center of the big spiral, it bisects the sheep spiral and horn of the sheep. At winter solstice, which is the far right picture, it's actually spectacular. You have to be standing there at sunrise, because as soon as the sun breaks the horizon, this column of light just boom, it appears on the rock face as if someone flips a light switch. Mm-hmm. And it touches the back end of that big spiral, bisects the spiral and horn of the big sheep. And so all through the year, they're watching that sun shadow line, and they are literally using that as their template to create the size, position, and proportion of each of these rock images so that they catch that sun shadow line in a specific alignment through the year. And that's how they're cosmicizing this image. That brings that to life and brings the power of the sun and the cosmos into the rituals and into the tribe.
Very impressive.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I will say hiking to that panel is not easy. I'm a big guy. COVID was not good for me, Miguel. I put on a few pounds, despite that I hiked a ton. But hiking to this place is pretty precarious. And so being there on the morning of winter solstice, hiking through the snow can be interesting to say the least, but totally worth it. All right. So that was 2 years of our study. Now we're going to go into a completely different portion of this presentation. After 2 years, word started to get out what we were doing, and we had a couple people belonging to the Utah Rock Art Research Association living in northeastern Utah called the Uinta Basin. It's where Dinosaur National Monument is located. It's a vast desert filled with gas and oil deposits, mineral deposits, because millions of years ago, it was a lake bed and it had megafauna, it had dinosaurs, and you can walk across some of the lake bed and literally see turtle shells, in the bed, and they're millions of years old. It's really quite something. But it was a hot spot for the Fremont Indian, and they said, we want you to come up and take a look at a couple of our sites. So let's go to the next slide. So we went up there, and we've been there for the past 2.5 years. Truly what we have found and the scratching has been spectacular. The Fremont are not, they're not building big temples like the Maya. They're rural. They're sort of, they're more of the trailer park as opposed to the as opposed to the big temples you see in Mesoamerica, right? Or even in Chaco Canyon. It's much more simple. But here in the Uinta Basin, they have discovered irrigation canals dating to about 225 CE AD, which means that they are growing corn using irrigation at 225 CE. So maize has come up. It's become a staple, and the culture we're looking at, this is the Fremont between probably 1050 and 1300 CE. This is
Mm.
the tail end of their occupation. One of the mysteries of Southwestern archaeology is at 1300 CE, everything collapses and nobody knows why. The ancestral Puebloans, Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, all those people disappear. The Fremont, all these villages, all through Utah are abandoned.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, you go all the way to the Ohio River Valley, Cahokia, right? The big city of Cahokia, which is 20,000 people, another 20, 30,000 people supporting it, that also collapses at the same time.
Wow.
So we have something going on over half the continent that we're not exactly sure. We know at the between 1250 and 1300 CE, there's a 50-year drought. And so climate change is part of this. You're in these high Utah deserts, 4,000 to 5,000 feet elevation. If you have a 50-year drought and you have become accustomed to growing maize as your primary staple crop, after 5 years, you are in serious trouble. And if you add to that raiding parties, from other villages or hunter gatherers coming in from the north or from the west, and they take your crop, or they, even kill people in your village.
Nice.
It becomes extremely difficult to survive. And so, there's competing theories as to what caused this. But so here we are in northeastern Utah, Uinta Basin, and the first place they take us is to this site because they think this guy here, this big red pictograph, is a summer solstice alignment. So we go there. This guy's about 3 feet tall. He's in this little canyon wash. So it runs north-south. That rock wall we're looking at faces east. There's a rock wall to the right of the picture facing west. So next picture. So one of the things we do when we survey a site is, we measure it. We measure the rock art. We look for signs of any erosion on any rock faces that are projecting the sun shadow line. Every once in a while, we find a break, which tells us the sun shadow line we're seeing is probably not the same one that they saw 1,000 years ago, 800 years ago. But we also go there at night, and we look at which stars rise and set in the local horizon. So right behind this panel, those two dots in the upper left, that's Jupiter and Saturn. So that's the ecliptic that goes right behind this panel. And so you would see the Milky Way vertical out of the Wash Canyon and horizontal. And so that becomes important for some of what we do, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Next slide. So here is a closer look. The first thing we see is this guy's headdress, by the way, is unique. We only find it in the Uinta Basin. It's found nowhere else. So that means it's special to this particular group of Fremont that are painting it on this rock face. The other thing we see is there are actually a ton of petroglyphs on this rock face underneath the pictograph. Do you see those? The next slide will show more. But some of those are pre-Fremont, and I'll show those to you. But what that tells us is this for rock art for centuries, maybe millennium, but for centuries. So this is going back probably turn of the millennium, maybe into the BCEs, where tribes are using this rock face and this particular canyon to do whatever they're doing. Next slide. So a couple things interested us about this figure. His headdress. So he's got this conical cap. It's kind of like an upside down bucket. You see that? And then he's got these two large protrusions. they look like rowing oars to us, like paddles of a boat. And
Yeah, it
so
does.
we named him the Oar Headed figure. This is simply our name for it, but it's the name we've published in our papers. So they look like oars to us. If you want to name it something else and I like it, then maybe we'll rename it. But it's the Oar Headed figure with a bucket top headdress. In his left arm, he has this fringe staff. And that's a common motif in the rock art, except this is the first time we've seen that the fringe staff is actually an extension of the arm. Instead of a hand holding a straight staff, that the staff is actually his arm. It's coming out of his arm and making a curve. And we had never seen that before. It's hard to see in this picture, but his right leg is twice as long as his left leg. You know, don't know why, but these are things we pick up on. Next slide. So here's a close-up. And again, I wish I had my laser pointer out, but the top, our left, that left oar, right to the left of it is a figure. Do you see him? He's got kind of a heart-shaped body, two arms, a round head with two little prongs coming out of the head. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see him.
Yeah. So that's pre-Fremont. That's not Fremont. The Fremont have these trapezoidal bodies. You look at that pictograph, it's a trapezoid, wide shoulders, narrow hips in this trapezoidal shape. But there's another one of those guys to the left of the, our left of the left arm. His body is almost the shape of a liver or something. And so this is an older layer of rock art style that's pre-Fremont. And then you see all these concentric circles. Actually, the rock face is covered with them. And so when we see a panel with, 12 to 20 concentric circles, that generally is a sun watching site. So that notifies us, hey, we should look at this. Next slide. Okay. Can you play that video?
I don't think so. No, it won't play.
Well, shoot. That sucks, because I was going to show you time-lapse video as to how the sunlight works on this thing.
Oh, pity.
So I'm going to have to maybe email you some video links, and then you can put those in the show notes and people can come back and watch them.
Sure. Or I can add them to the video or something.
And you can add them to the video.
Yeah.
But there's nothing I can do. Go back to the previous slide.
Okay.
Actually, go back to the previous one. Let's get a little farther. Okay, this guy's fine. So what happens on summer solstice is at sunrise, the sunlight touches the top of the rock above image, and it starts descending. But there's a V-shaped crack in the opposing rock canyon wall, and the sunlight spills through that, and it creates a chevron of light that is cast on this rock face. And as it descends, that chevron of light morphs and takes the shape of basically the headdress of this figure. So as it comes down, it fills the headdress in a V. So those oars have light. It's perfect. It's a perfect intrusion of light. The top square cap, the upside down bucket, is illuminated, but the oars contain the chevron of light. And so that was interesting. But a few minutes later, that chevron of light keeps descending down the rock, and it morphs a little more, and it wraps that curved staff perfectly. Wow. So that's why the staff is curved. It is aligning to the sun shadow line of summer solstice that perfectly fills the headdress, and then it wraps that curved staff. And then if you keep watching, it keeps going down, and there's this little protrusion of shadow that he ends up standing on. And that's why one leg is twice as long as the other, because for him to stand on that shadow line, one leg has to be twice as long as the other to perfectly stand on the shadow. And so the entire phenomenon takes 40 minutes for the sun shadow line to sweep across the image. But the entire image has been molded summer solstice. So to us, this is an unequivocal calendric pictograph. Now, as part of our study, we actually photographed the sun shadow line for 30 days before the summer solstice. You get that data, and that's the same data as 30 days after the summer solstice, because the light pattern repeats. And then we were also there for equinoxes, winter solstice, cross quarter days. So we have photographed it through the year. But it turns out the alignment I just described only occurs 3 days before the summer solstice, 3 days after the summer solstice, 7 days a year. Now, that is a very tight light alignment. One of the things in Clear Creek Canyon is actually the way the light intersects those panels, it actually occurs over weeks. And, we're used to watching Indiana Jones, where on a specific day, on a specific minute, the light comes through and does its thing. But that's not what they wanted. They needed lead time. Because what they're doing is their rituals are associated with the lunar calendar.
Right.
And so you need 2 or 3 week lead time. When the sun shadow thing starts happening on your rock image, then on the next new moon or full moon, you're going to do your ritual. Well, that might be a week or two away. So you need lead time to do this. Also, it's cloudy every other day, right? And so in order to see it, you need lead time. A 7-day phenomenon is the tightest we have found. That is very tight. And so if you miss it 3 days before or after, you miss it. And you have to wait till next year. And so that was impressive to us. Sorry, we'll get the video for your viewers later. All right, next slide.
Right. This one or the next one, John?
Next one. Okay. So I do have this. Here is the V-shape light. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do see it.
In his headdress, the left image, it's hard to see if you can expand it. That's wrapping the curved staff. And the right image, he's standing on that shadow bump, his feet perfectly touching the shadow line. So again, they've used that sun shadow line on summer solstice to determine the size, proportion, and placement of that rock art image. Next slide. All right. Dang it. This next video we're not going to see either, and it's even more spectacular. Once we saw that, we told our field guides, okay, this is real stuff. We just want to look. Do you know anywhere else in the basin? I mean, it's a couple hundred square miles, right? Anywhere else in the basin where we find this figure, because he's unique. He doesn't appear anywhere else. This bucket-shaped headdress with these 2 oar protrusions. And they said, well, yeah, there's actually another place that we also think is a solar shrine. And he's there too. So we said, take us there. So this is miles away, different canyon. And we find this really interesting sandstone boulder that is covered with petroglyphs and also pictographs from that same earlier culture. Next slide. So here's this boulder. It's actually broken in half vertically, but then it's also broken in half horizontally. The front part of it has broken and fallen, and the right part of the broken part fell over. So you see the rock slab behind that guy in the left image. Mm-hmm. And so what that leaves then is this rock spur sticking out that you can stand under. We're going to see that in a second. This right picture, I'm actually standing behind the boulder, looking through the crack to the opposing horizon. Next slide. And so here we are. That center picture is I'm standing underneath that rock spur, and it's jutting out and it's pointing. Do you see? There's this little notch on the horizon. So there's that opposing bluff, and then sort of that dark space, and then the rising bluff to the left. Do you see that?
Yeah, we do see it.
Yeah, so there's this notch on the horizon that the rock spur is pointing to. Now, right at the base of that rock spur is this figure, and that's the Oar Head. It's a completely different stylization, but his bucket headdress is indicated by the two eyes and then two mirroring dots up top. Do you see that?
Yeah.
They're indicating the bucket shape. And then the two oars are just these pecked lines. And interestingly enough, he's pecked over top these two red pictographs, which are those heart-shaped images from the pre-Fremont peoples. And so on the other panel, it was a pictograph carved over earlier petroglyphs. In this panel, it's a petroglyph carved over earlier pictographs. All right. So unfortunately, we're not going to see the time-lapse video, which is actually spectacular. That was the next slide. Oh, can you play it?
I don't think so. No, there's no way to play it. It's turned it into an image.
Okay. Well, what happens is as you're standing there on summer solstice, the sun reaches the zenith, which is overhead. You can't see it underneath the rock spur. But as it starts setting in the west, as you stand underneath that rock spur, the sun actually clings to the left edge of the rock spur all the way down the sky. And then it sets right into the notch that it's pointing to. So this is a horizon-based astronomical viewing point, which is widely used in these cultures. So this is a sun shrine where they're watching the summer solstice sunset. The other place was the summer solstice sunrise. This is the summer solstice sunset. If it's the same culture, the same group of villages performing these same rituals, you probably have one clan, a sun priest in one clan in charge of the sunrise, another one in charge of the sunset. And so they've got these different sacred shrines where they are cosmicizing their rock art and their rituals for their agricultural cycle. Again, we'll have to show that time. The time lapse is really cool because when the sun sets, we get a solar flash, and it's really impressive.
Wow.
So next slide. All right, so there is a still image of the sunset underneath their summer solstice. So you can see how it ends up looking. Well, this got us really excited. That's 2 oar heads, 2 solar shrines. That's 2 for 2. What else do you got? So we began our search across, 150 square miles of desert, of bluffs, of cliffs, of canyons. Next slide. Oh, this is the back of that boulder. You can see the sun setting at summer solstice. Next slide. Here are the 2 images. That first one with the chevron of light filling his headdress. I time lapse. Was there any sun shadow phenomenon happening on this second figure at the horizon-based shrine? And it turns out this sun shadow line that goes down the edge of his oar and bisects his face actually stays there for about an hour. It doesn't move. And so to us, that was significant. It's not unequivocal, but it was significant. So that's probably why they placed that figure there, because that's how the shadow line, it bisects his face, follows that oar during the entire sunset. All right. So we know he's a solar figure at this point. This oar-headed bucket head is associated with the summer solstice. We know that for sure, certain. We've got the video. We've got, months of photography on it. Next slide. Oh, I forgot. So we begin looking. This left image, that's actually probably he's a warrior. He's a sun warrior. His right arm, he's holding a sun shield, which is a spiral surrounded by the sun rays. Under his left elbow, that's your oar head. The oars are prolonged. The bucket shape is missing. But we know that's an oar head for a couple of reasons. The guy's left hand is holding what looks like a mushroom. Do you see that? That long, there's this bulbous sort of shape with this long thing coming out of it. Kind of looks like a tree or a mushroom. Right? Underneath that is a buffalo headdress. That's an anthropomorph of a buffalo head. So look, about this as I do. We first walk up and we go, is that oar head? It doesn't have the bucket shape. It's probably not. It's got a buffalo near it. It's got a sun warrior. And what is this mushroom tree? Interestingly enough, 50 feet away from this guy is this right image. And again, we look at this. Is this the oar head? Because his oars are pointing straight down. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And we not seen that. And so we're like, those could be hair bobs. They could be feathers. It doesn't seem to be like the oar head. But what's interesting is there's this bucket shape above his eyes. Do you see that?
Bucket shade above his eyes.
There's two eyes in his head.
Oh, okay. So yes.
And then there's that, trapezoid bucket shape above his eyes. So we find that in the oar head in other images. So he might be an oar head, but one of our team members, Tina, was the one to actually walk in front of this image right at the right moment, because look what happens on summer solstice. This light spear rises up from the ground and goes right to the center of the tri-spiral on this figure. And actually, I've also got that time lapsed. And that, if you look at that tri-spiral, the lower line that meets the circumference on the left there, the tip of that sun spear touches that point and it follows that lower line until it rises up to fill the center. And then it follows the line going to the other side of the spiral. So the entire spiral has been carved to catch the tip of that sun spear through the hour that it happens at the summer solstice. And again, this happens 7 days of the year. This is another very tight alignment. So a highly potential oar head, but another solar alignment. These are pretty incredible. And so we're getting quite excited. Next slide. Another panel. Again, this left figure, I really like this panel. His oars are curved. Do you see? They're not straight out. They're curved. And so we're starting to see lots of variations of this solar deity and what they do with his oars. In fact, in some of them, they turn into corn cobs. In some of them, they turn, they face all the directions, up, down. We know this guy's an oar head. He's got, again, right above his eyes. You see his two eyes and mouth. Above his eyes is this. It's this. They've got a hole there, a pecked mark there, and it's like an opening into the other world. And so we repeatedly find that in the bucket shape on other images. But whenever we see someone like this with that hole above the eyes, and he's got two oar-like protrusions, it's probably the oar head. What interested us about this panel is to the right is another buffalo head, right? That big figure to the right. And connecting the two are 29 counting dots. And 29 is the number of the lunar days in a lunar synodic month. And that made us think, my goodness, is the buffalo figure a lunar deity? And the oar-headed figure a solar deity? You have these two spirals, and to the left, you see two square-headed figures with no arms. Do you see those guys?
Yeah, I see them.
Yeah. Well, about a third of the mile away, those two guys appear again with a 5-pointed star carved between them, and they keep appearing in pairs. They're twins. And so actually they're probably related to the hero twins of Mesoamerica, the two hero twins that go into the underworld in the Popol Vuh, for example, in the Maya mythology, where they learn the secrets of rebirth. They take heads, the heads regrow, and it's all part of a Venus cycle, because the twins are Venus as morning star and Venus as evening star. And the Venus cycle in Mesoamerica was connected to the Maize agricultural cycle. And we're going to be talking about that in a second, because it was also connected to headhunting. And we're going to be talking about that in a second. If those represent Venus, then we have a solar deity, 29 dots, probably a lunar deity. We're looking at the entire Fremont cosmology in this panel: Venus, sun, moon. The two spirals are probably the northern and southern sky. So this is their, whatever it is, it's the cosmovision of this Fremont. So that's why we like this panel. Next slide.
Yeah, I can't think of anything better than Oar Head yet. I think it's the best name. Mysterious Oar Head. Like a horror movie villain, too. Oar Head has arrived.
The Oar Head, that's right.
Yeah. All right, next slide. And yeah, keep talking. I have to let a cat out.
Okay, well, actually, the next slide begins our horror movie.
Right.
There it goes. So the left image, those are two oar heads. They're covered in holes, and those are actually bullet holes. So let me just pause right here. A lot of these panels are deeply vandalized. They've been graffitied, initials, shot nearby. So let me just give my pitch now to everyone watching. If you come across rock art, please do not touch, write, shoot at, or deface in any way the sacred site. These are not scribblings. They're not ancient graffiti. These are sacred images, living images of the cosmos. They are a graphic representation of what we would consider holy writ, scripture. They are the sacred. So, these two left images are shot all up with bullet holes. And as we looked at them, we noticed that lower left figure has a square object in his right hand. Do you see that?
Yeah.
With two holes in it. Those are the only two holes that aren't bullet holes. Those are pecked. You can see the peck marks in them. They are eyes. And so our oar-headed figure is holding a decapitated head.
No.
And that's what that mushroom was, by the way, in that previous image.
Yeah.
It's a decapitated head with neck and blood and viscera coming out of the neck.
Oh, this is a horror movie.
Oh, yeah. We're just getting into it.
I was being facetious.
Oh, no, it gets worse. So look, in his left hand, there's this little line that's a knife. Our solar deity is a headhunter, and he's got a knife by which he's taken a head. The upper right figure, another oar head. In his left hand is the head, this time in the shape of that mushroom. It's not quite square, but you can see the knife above the head sticking out. In his right hand, he holds that fringed staff. And that fringed staff is important. By the way, there's no sun shadow phenomenon that happens on this rock face. However, they are facing directly to the summer solstice sunrise. That's their orientation. So we keep running into this figure, and he keeps having either horizon-based orientations or sun shadow interactions. And so we know for certain he's a solar deity. But it's this left image where we first met him holding heads. And we were like, well, that's interesting. What does that mean? And that took us down the rabbit hole. And thereafter, almost every image we saw of the oar head came accompanied with a decapitated head. So in this right image, this guy is actually big. I mean, the Fremont were 5 feet tall, 5'4", right? A really tall Fremont might be 5'7", but the average height, they're small people, 5 feet, 5'4". This guy's probably 6 feet, 7 feet tall. He's a big, he's a petroglyph, but you can see his oars are painted red. So when a petroglyph is painted, it's called a pictoglyph. because it's both a pictograph and a petroglyph. So anyway, there's not going to be a test at the end, but he's been painted red. He's got, you see the hole in his bucket cap?
Yeah.
That's there again. It's like a sipepu, the connecting point to the other world. And he's got his two oars, which have lines in them, and they're painted. And of course, underneath his left arm is a decapitated head with tears coming out of the eyes. Do you see the tear lines coming out of the eyes of the decapitated head?
I do see it.
Right?
Yeah.
To the left is another oar head. His head's in shadow, so it might be hard to see without expanding. But that oar head has tears coming out of his eyes. So that's the crying eye motif that we will repeatedly see in these images. And to the right, you see that big red splash down human figure. Whenever you see an upside down human figure, it almost always means death. And so we've got something going on here. Our solar deity, with big feet, by the way, we call him Bigfoot, has a decapitated head. Oh, in his left hand, he's holding an axe. Do you see that stone axe?
Yeah.
That's the weapon that he took that head with. And so now we have a mystery. We have a legitimate mystery. We've got a solar deity. We've got two sites that have actual time-lapse proof that he's aligned with the sun. This third site, this left picture here, is oriented to summer solstice sunrise. But now we keep finding him with heads. Next image. Here we have several where, the center is that Bigfoot with the head. To the left, we have a couple unique images where the oars have been turned into corn cobs, and you see decapitated heads. The top image there, they're holding a decapitated head. The bottom image to the right, the decapitated head has the crying eye motif. This very far right image, we have that bucket oar head. His oars are painted down. His bucket is painted red. In his left hand, he's holding a stone knife. Do you see the knife in his left hand, that far right picture?
Yeah.
So that's what he's using to take heads. And in his right hand, it's kind of hard to see, but he is holding a round object with knobs on it. Do you see that in his right hand? We didn't know what that was. And most of our work, by the way, occurs in the library. We go out and we do all this work in the field, and we keep running into stuff, and we go, what the heck is that? And so, our research is we look at the ethnography of the Pueblos, the Hopi, the Zuni, the Tewa, etc. And a lot of information was recorded in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they're the descendants of these people. So some of their traditions got down into there. So that's as best, because there's no writing in this culture group. We can't tell you what these images mean. We try our best not to interpret rock art images because it can mean anything. However, you have a solar deity with a bucket or headdress with heads and knives. We know he's a headhunter. We can say that unequivocally. That round thing with knobs we discovered is a scalp stretcher.
Whoa.
So again,
do we want to know what a scalp stretcher is? Is this?
We'll go to the next slide and you'll find out.
All right.
All right. Here's a scalp.
Oh. For those listening, when I put this out on audio, you're going to thank us. You're not seeing what we're seeing now.
This scalp actually was discovered in Arizona, and it's basket maker culture. So it's pre-Fremont. It goes into the BCEs, basket maker culture between 1500 BCE and 200 BCE. So this is an early scalp, and you see he's got a loop on the top of the hair, right? That's what they hang it with. And we actually have petroglyphs of heads with loops on them. And now we know what that is. The heads are scalps that they've sewn leather loops into, which they hang on their scalp poles. Now, again, you see the cowboy and Indian movies of the 70s and 60s and 80s, right? And it's terribly, racist by this time, but they take scalps by cutting the top of the hair with a knife. A proper scalp is actually defleshing the entire head. And that's what you're looking at. The entire face, the eyelids, the hair, the mouth is sewn shut. It's taking the entire head. Now, why would they do this? Why is a solar deity taking heads? What's that have to do with the solar cycle? What's it have to do with anything else? So look, as we get down into Mesoamerica, I don't know if you've studied the Maya, the Aztec, the Toltec, but they are taking heads, they are cutting out hearts, there's human sacrifice at all the temples, and it's part of their cosmovision. And it's coming up from there into North America. So that influence is coming up into here. So next slide. All right, I'm going to explain heads are taken. And to do that, I have to take a 10-minute parenthetical and talk about mythological thinking.
Okay.
Now, we talked about this, years ago when I was on your show before, Miguel.
Right.
99% of human history exists in orality, people without writing. And these groups have no writing. The Maya had writing, but 95% of the population do not read and write, and they're still operating under the demands of orality, even though they have writing. Okay. Oral thinkers think analogically. And what that means is if two things are related, or if two things have similar features, similar colors, they appear at the same time, if there's some similarity in some way, they relate them and they connect them, and they say they are, the cosmos connects them. Mm-hmm. For example, if a certain star rises on the horizon before the sun, and at the same time, the animals migrate into the valley, or a plant grows or blooms, they link the two. The rising of that star is the thing that's causing the animal migration or the blooming of the plant. This is how we get astrology. It's analogical thinking, where you are relating the cycles in the sky to the cycles on the ground, and you say one is causing the or related to the other, right? Actually, it's not that the rising star is causing the plant to bloom. They're analogical. The blooming plant, there's something in that in the star, right? It's kind of like a fractal. And so why would these societies want to take a head? Well, there's a reason. In Mayan cosmology, the soul comes from the highest heaven, the high heaven, by two deities, male and female, right? And the soul has the power of tulot. It's this power of animation that moves things, and it's that power that causes things to be created, to transform. And so it's this power of spirit. In Egyptian, it's the Ka, right? The Ka spirit. Right. It's a very similar concept, and it comes from the star world. This soul, and as it enters into the human world, the mid-world, they too have an upper world, a mid-world, and an underworld, right? As it enters into the mid-world, it is activated by the heat of the sun. Okay, and then it enters into the head of the fetus. And that is why your head is constantly producing warmth. It's the heat of the sun that it animates. It's the divine power of the sun that animates the energy of your body, that creates the heat in your head. Okay. Also, the head contains all the divine functions: your sight, your smell, your hearing, your taste, your speech, which gives you the ability to speak, to command, to alter, and to change. All the divine functions of the cosmos are in the head, and the heat is in the head. So literally, the divine aspect of the cosmos enters into the head of every human being. Now, something else happens. When a human child is born, what's one of the first thing that happens when the woman's about ready to give birth? Her water breaks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's her placental waters usher forth, out of the womb. And then she begins to dilate. And the first thing that appears is what? The head that's emerging from the other world, the hole connected to the other world, right? The first thing that comes out is the divine head, and it's preceded by waters, the breaking of the water. And further, almost always the baby infant cries and produces waters from the eyes. There's only a couple places where the human body produces clear waters. The placental waters at birth, the tears, right? And, actually, if you decapitate, there's some spinal fluid that can also be linked to these liquids. And what that means is a child born from the eternity into the material world comes by way of the head out of the womb. The head is created by waters because they're the first thing that pour out. And the head creates waters, the tears. Okay. The head is the divine essence that creates water. Okay? So you're living in an agricultural cycle, and your entire agriculture is based on, several things, but on your solar cycle and your rainy season. You need the rains, especially in the American Southwest. In these deserts, this is dry crop planting. Some villages irrigated their fields. A lot of them simply dug a hole deep down until they reached really wet soil. They'd drop 5 or 8 corn seeds in it with some, maybe some guts or some fertilizer of some sort. They'd cover it over. That's all they would do. It has to grow from that. And so they require the rains in order for that to happen. And it turns out, not only was there a 50-year drought between 1250 and 1300, but before that, there was about a 300 warming period of rain. There was an increase in moisture. The winters were shorter. The summers were longer. There was more precipitation. And that is why we see these exploding villages, Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, because a lot of maize is being produced. And so therefore you have surplus. And so you can grow your villages. So the bottom line is, in the Pueblos, they have words for the head or for the scalp. And those words, they call the scalp a word that means rain. The scalp is equated to rain. The scalp is called a light rain, a water-filled covering, a water being, or a seed being. That's the name they have for the head or the scalp. And again, they're analogizing the head with the waters at birth that produce it, and the tears that come out of the eyes that produce water. The head produces the waters. And so the scalp then is that thing which contains the power of the cosmos, which will produce the rain. Okay, so if you want to offer a sacrifice to your sun deity or to your rain deity, what do you give them? You give them a head.
Yeah, it has it all. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's what they're doing. So that's why they are literally. So a Mayan concept is Itz, I-T-Z. One of the Mayan solar deity in the Yucatan, Itzamna, is their solar god. And Itz is the essential substance of a thing. It's the essential, like it's the sap of a tree. It's the nectar of a flower. and it's the tears of a person. It's their essential essence. You shed tears when you cry, but what causes a person to cry? Pain surely causes a person to cry, right? When you cut someone's head off, they are crying and they're collecting the tears, the eats, the essential essence that will bring the rains. However, laughter causes tears. Sorrow causes tears. Joy causes tears. It is all human experience that produce the tears. And they recognize that the tears is a product of divine feeling, good and bad, right? Pain and joy. And so that is the essence of a person. So the crying eye motif is the eats that brings, that brings the fertility. Makes sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. So they would scalp an individual and then sacrifice the scalp to the gods. They wouldn't just keep it as, I guess you were talking about those racist movies where they just keep the scalps in their tent as a souvenir. It wasn't anything like that.
well, actually, this left picture here is a Hopi Pueblo, the very early 1900s. And these two Hopi, and at the very top is a scalp that they've hung on it. And this is where they are. I mean, this is the pole that is the axis mundi. The offering is on top of the pole, and they're performing, a series of their ceremonies, including rain ceremonies. That's what that fringe staff is, by the way. The fringe staff that we looked at in those previous images is a rain staff. The fringes are analogical to the rain pouring from the sky. And so it's a rain staff, and the solar deity holds a rain staff in a head. That is the connection. It's the solar deity is bringing the rains. And so the Fremont, in March, the spring equinox, they're planting, they're germinating their seeds. In April, depending if the snow's gone, they're going to start clearing the field. May, they plant. In June, everything's up and running. And they plant actually a series, several waves of plantings in case they get an early freeze. The first planting won't work. So they'll plant 2, 3, 4, 5 plantings. But by summer solstice, all the plantings are done. And they orient all their rituals now to rainmaking because they've done all they can do. And unless you're irrigating your field, a lot of these villages are now depending on the rain. And so now they do the rainmaking ceremonies.
Well, somebody in the chat was saying, we got to watch out, John, because there's a drought in California. You don't want all these people to grab bone knives and start chasing other people in the drought.
Last time I watched the news, I think that is happening. It's already happening.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Yeah. So, this is a sort of dark side to an ancient cosmovision, or at least, it's a side that I certainly wouldn't want to do that. But this is part of the cosmovision, is that we need something to bring the rains in. We've got to bring them in from the sun god and the rain god. And the most potent thing we have as a sacrifice is the rain bringer, which is a head or a scalp. And so, we have no idea how often this occurred. There are some people, in some quarters, it's politically incorrect to even mention that they were taking heads. But so some people say, well, maybe it's just metaphorical. No. Oral thinkers are concrete thinkers. If you see a head in a petroglyph, that actually happened. And so it's not a metaphor. It's certainly symbolic, but we have no idea how often did it happen annually? Did it happen monthly? Did it happen once every 8 years, once every 5 years? We're going to go to why it actually may have been attuned to the Venus cycle here in a bit. And so, we don't know anything about it. What we do know is actually, the rain Venus cycle comes up from Mesoamerica into the American Southwest at about 1050 CE. And this is when this starts appearing in the Uinta Basin. And so that's how we know that what we're probably looking at is the latter end. So before that, what did they do? Were they taking heads before 1050 CE? The truth is, Miguel, if you study ancient cultures, actually headhunting is pretty common globally through history. I mean, and for the same reasons. The analogical thinking, it doesn't matter what the culture is. The head contains all the divine functions. And so it becomes one of the most powerful offerings you can make in any ritual context. And so you find headhunting in every continent, in every ancient society, in some form on every continent. All right. So there's that. Next slide. All right. So look, this is really interesting. I apologize for the quality of the image. This is a fertility shrine that is really, it's on the top of a mountain. And so the hike is a bit strenuous. And you get up to the top of the mountain, and there is this 200-foot crevice that you crawl through. And literally, it's like a birth canal. And you crawl through it, and it emerges out to this little, very, small rock ledge that's covered in petroglyphs facing, the south. And the rock face is highly patinaed. And when I got there, the sun was just glaring off it. I took hundreds of pictures, and almost all of them were garbage because I just couldn't get a shot that wasn't reflecting the sunlight. But this is an amazing spot. Here we have on the right here, we have two main anthropomorphs. The left one is a solar deity. It's not the Oar Head, but it's a figure. You can see between his legs testes. Do you see that? That tells you that that's the male, and he's got a solar headdress, right? Yeah. And to the right is a female, and you can see her dilated vagina between her legs. It's those two lines with something coming out of it. Right?
Oh, I see. Yeah,
and that is the vagina. But look what's right next to her. You have this large amorphous sort of sac with this curl line that connects to this human figure with two arms that's emerging out of a sort of semimorphous sac. Do you see that?
Yeah.
That is very probably strange. The placenta, the umbilical cord, and a fetus. You're looking at childbirth associated with this female figure. Now, what is really interesting is in the very bottom right, there is a headless torso. Very bottom right of the image. Do you see? It's walking. It's part of its cutoff image.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But it's walking towards the center of the panel. It's a torso, two legs, no head. The head is being worn by the sun god. Do you see that male figure with the sun headdress? He's wearing.
The big feet.
With the big feet. Yeah. That round thing on his chest is a head.
Oh, it's his head. Yeah.
And there's some drippings coming out of the head that go down his chest and turn into the semen from his testes. Right. This is so what we're looking at. Again, I can't tell you what this means, but we're looking at a fertility image. In fact, just to the
so you're basically saying that the scalps are like a form of Viagra?
Yeah.
I better go to the pharmacy. No, just kidding.
Somehow they're associating this headless figure with the childbirth, with the head being worn by the solar deity. And again, if we look at Mesoamerican cosmology, the soul comes from the star world and is engendered by the sun god, and then enters into the head of the fetus that is born with the waters. And so we're probably seeing something similar here, where this headless torso walks into this birthing scene with the solar deity holding the head of the baby that's going to be born. To the upper left image, it's very hard to see, but there's a male figure with 3 female figures to our left, and that's the trimesters of birth. That first figure on the right, she has rounded hips. The middle figure, she has a completely round belly, and the last figure, she's in a childbirth position. So the entire thing is a fertility panel, but it's the point of me showing this image is it's connecting the head with childbirth. And so that's very important. Next slide. This is a different canyon, but what we have here is actually a field, and you have these lines coming in this large round area with a hole drilled in the middle of it. So again, probably a stick with a feather put on it for a prayer feather, prayer beads. But you have this large cross-hatched circle, and has these lines coming out of it with they're sprouts. So this is a field, a fertile field. To the left, there's a square irrigated field. To the right, another ovoid crosshatch field that's sort of scratched out. It's like a fallow field. So this is probably your field through the agricultural cycle, from germination, the square field, to plant growth, plant sprouting through your May, June, July to your harvest, and then returning the field back to the ground in September, October. What's interesting is underneath the field is an upside down figure without a head. Neck. Do you see that? Yeah. Upside down. It's that trapezoidal body. He doesn't have a head. Blood's coming out of his neck. So again, we have a headless figure associated, in this case, not with human gestation, but with the agricultural cycle. So now we're starting to get motifs of not only the solar god holding heads, but now of fertility, agricultural and human fertility that also have headless figures associated with them. So now, now we know with a very high degree of probability that the head is associated with fertility. And as we read the ethnography from Mesoamerica and the American Southwest, we figure it out. We figure out that, in fact, they take heads and scalps to bring the rains, to bring the agricultural cycle. At least in amongst the Maya, the soul resides in the head, and it comes from the star world engendered by the sun deity. And we just saw, an iteration of that in the previous slide. So we have some connected religious ideas that, I can't tell you for sure what's going on, but those are what the images seem to be telling us. Next slide. All right. So, by the way, the very first figure right next to that field motif we just saw is an oar head. You see his oars. Again, his conical cap is missing. Sometimes he has that flat head, but in his right hand is very hard to see. He's holding a fringed staff. And so what we know about this guy so far is he's a solar figure. He's a headhunter. He often carries a rain staff. He's associated with fertility. In a couple images, his oars are cobs of corn. They're maize. He's associated with the maize cycle. So he's a sun and rain god. So that's what we can tell from the iconography in the rock art. Next slide. Okay, so this panel was a game changer for me, and we discovered him rather late. This was like a year and a half ago, maybe, when we came across this. This is a major site. It's a rock bluff that's about 300 feet long, and it has hundreds, over 1,000 images carved on it. And it has 2 viewing platforms in it, 2 solar shrines in it. We've already confirmed that. And it has several layers of rock imagery. There is pre-Fremont, Fremont, contemporary Fremont, post-Fremont, Ute, Paiute. So the entire site was a pilgrimage site used for centuries by different Native American groups. So the site itself is sacred. it is basically a temple site being used by multiple cultures. So why? Well, part of it is it has a couple natural viewing shrines which are covered in petroglyphs. But for the purpose of, how am I doing on time, by the way? I really got to speed up.
No worries. No worries. If we go over 2, that's fine.
Okay.
No worries at all.
I'm being a little bit long-winded. Sorry. What was fascinating about this panel? First off, these are over life size. These figures are at least 6 feet tall. They're high up on the rock face, so I can't actually measure them. And so they're hard to access. But the left figure is our Oar Head, and in his right hand, he's holding a head. Do you see the head? To our left, his right hand, you've got the head that he's holding. His oars are rays coming out of the side of his bucket helmet. Do you see the rays coming out? They are now feathers or sun rays. And he's got that opening in his bucket above his eyes. And it's actually, it's very faded on the rock face, but it's gorgeous art. This is very sophisticated for rock art. It was painted. So in its heyday, it was carved and painted. It would have been very colorful. Most rock art is pretty rudimentary. And the reason why is because for most of these villages, the priest who carves the rock art, he's wearing multiple hats. He does the hunt. He does, he helps plant. He's the sun priest. He's watching the sun. He's got a lot to perfect rock art. And so for most rock art, we get line drawings, right? It's pretty rudimentary. The rock art we're seeing in this canyon is very sophisticated for rock art. And that tells us one of a couple things. One, the artist has had a lot of time to work on the art, which tells us either you have basically an artist class in this agrarian village society, which means they've produced enough surplus that you can now just feed people to do art, right?
Right.
Or there's another option. He's an import, or she is an import, migrated in, who was a craftsman in another culture who came in and then influenced this culture. Maybe even a slave. It could be that too.
Could be.
So it could be from the outside, but if it's from the inside, it tells us that the society has reached a certain economic level and a certain sophisticated level where they have artists. But look at these images. The middle figure there is a cat. That is a lion head with a U-shaped crown with one spray of rays coming out of its left ear. That was the first time I had ever seen a lion petroglyph right next to the oar-headed solar deity with the rays coming out of the head. When I first saw that, I immediately thought that's Mesoamerican. That is the imagery you are seeing in Mexico, in the Yucatan. Itzamna has a partner. Itzamna is the sun god of the Maya. He has another god, I forget which letter it is, but it's the midnight sun, the underworld sun, the sun that is in the netherworld, and that's a jaguar.
No.
So you have the sun deity next to a lion deity, right? Sometimes Itzamna is the morning star, Venus, and the jaguar is the evening star. And so it can be Venus or it can be the sun, day sun, night sun. Chalk, or Chalk, the rain god, the Mayan rain god, also is very often paired with a jaguar. So, and Cha'ak, or the rain god, is also a headhunter. Itzamna's a headhunter, Cha'ak's a headhunter, but Cha'ak is almost always carrying a head and a knife. And this is down in Maya, because he's the rain bringer, and it's the same kind of thinking. But again, He's paired with a jaguar very often. We're going to look at that shortly. And so when I first saw this, I thought, my God, that looks Mesoamerican, which had me rethinking everything, because how's that getting up here?
Right.
This is all the way up in northeastern Utah, you know, where Colorado, Utah, Wyoming meet. This is way north. Now we know there's Mesoamerican influence at Chaco Canyon, where I started the presentation. They have found coatl feathers, parrot bones, all kinds of stuff coming up from Mexico and Central America in Chaco Canyon. Direct trade routes. They had an aviary in Chaco Canyon where they were raising parrots for their feathers, for their costumes. So, and we know that the Fremont, a Five Finger Ridge, are trading with Chaco Canyon. So we know that there is a highway of information and contact coming up from Mexico into southern Utah. But this is northern Utah. And what I'm looking at here on this panel is a solar deity holding a head with rays coming out of his head next to a lion deity. And that, you know, that looks very Mesoamerican to me. Next slide. This is to the left of that. It's two oar heads. The left figure, he has one oar going down. The right figure, one oar going up. What's really interesting, though, is that there is this spiral by the head of the right figure. Can we go to the previous slide? On the very bottom right, so there's a second lion head. Its face is eroded off, but you can see the U-shaped headdress. But to the very bottom right, by the leg of that bottom right figure, do you see that spiral?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
It's a 5-ring spiral. And up to the left, just off picture, is an 8-ring spiral. The necklace and earbobs of the lion figure have 5 orbs, 2 orbs for the earrings, 3 orbs for the chest plate. See that? The solar deity is holding a necklace, and kind of hard to see. We'll magnify it here in a couple slides, but it's 8 orbs. So we keep running into 5-ring spirals, 8-ring spirals, 5 orb necklaces, 8 orb necklaces. Okay, next slide. So that's a 5-ring spiral there. I wanted to show this because in this one image, you see 4 or 5 different culture groups. The Fremont are those oar heads. Right below the Fremont left figure is a profile of a head. Do you see that petroglyph?
Yeah.
It looks kind of modern. That's actually Ute. That was carved probably 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. To the left of the image, we have this large rectangular body covered in lines. That's not Fremont. That's probably basket maker, living co-equal with the Fremont or even pre-Fremont. We have the entire panel is covered in purple clay. That's not Fremont. And so we just have these layers of different cultures using this one spot that they keep coming to. All right, next slide. All right, so I'm gonna, I'm gonna try to wrap this up here in the next 15 minutes, which is going to be a lot. But here I have on the left a picture of Mesoamerica. So this is Mexico, the Yucatan. This is where the Maya are living. You know, something happens at the end of the 9th century CE. We have what's called the Maya collapse, and again, like the collapse that happens in the American Southwest and Cahokia. There's several theories. Why did the Maya civilization collapse? You know, it's climate change. There's external factors, external war, it's civil war, internal factors. There's a series of tipping points. And what ends up happening is, sure enough, the Maya city-states, several of them are emptied. And we know that the demographics are radically changed. We know that there's, between 8 and 10 million people throughout the Yucatan area. But after the Maya collapse, that number's cut in half. Where did all those millions of people go? Right. So some of them died, starvation, warfare, but not that many. So there's mass migrations heading out. And where are they going? Well, they're probably going every direction. They're going south into South America. They're going north into what will become the American Southwest. So to our right, we have these culture groups, the Anasazi, which is the ancestral Puebloan. I am studying the Fremont, that takes up most of Utah, Mogollon, Hohokam, Patayan, and all these are being influenced by Mesoamerican culture. We can track that all the way up into Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. And what our research team is showing is actually we can now track it all the way up into northern Utah. This highway of influences is coming all the way up here between 1050 and 1300 CE. We have that whole complex that's happening in Mesoamerica happening amongst this group of Fremont. Next slide. All right, so now I'm going to show you some Mayan temples. They become very interesting to us. On our left, this is Cha'ak, the rain god. I wish I had my pointer because it's kind of hard. In the center column is his face, and he's got two eyes. You can kind of make out a mouth. And he's got these glyphs surrounding him, these sort of squarish glyphs. Those are Venus glyphs. Cha'ak is connected to Venus. And what's interesting is this particular temple is oriented northwest. And that's because Venus appears as a morning star in the morning sky for about 260 days. And then it disappears for about 50 days. And then it reappears as an evening star in the western sky for about 260 days. Then it disappears for 8 days and reappears as the morning star. So that's the Venus cycle. And so what happens is Venus appears as a morning star 5 times and as an evening star 5 times. So there's an 8-5 periodicity from an observer on Earth of Venus 5 times every 8 years as a morning star, 5 times as an evening star. Okay. Now remember those 5-8 spirals I was pointing out on that panel? Remember the 5-8 necklaces I was pointing out on that panel? These are Venus numbers. That is really interesting. But the other interesting thing is that whole panel that I showed a couple slides ago with the oar head and the lion figure is oriented not south. 90% in this area face south. All the petroglyphs, right? I told you the orientation, they face south. That entire bluff with the viewing the solar shrines face northwest to the summer solstice sunset. Okay. So when we go into Maya land, the Temple of Cha'ak here faces northwest. It's not particularly facing the summer solstice sunset. What it's facing is Venus as evening star in the north.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Because when Venus appears in the north as the evening star, guess what? That's the start of the Yucatan rain season. Venus brings the rains. Venus as morning star is also a head. As evening star is associated with head hunting. The head brings the rains. Venus, the head, rain. Northwest, northeast. So for thousands of years, Venus is evening star appearing in the north. So Venus goes across the horizon like the sun does, north and south, because it's always close to the sun. So when Venus is in its northern range as evening star in Mesoamerica, that starts the rain season. Now, in Utah, it's off because Mesoamerica is, that's hundreds of miles south. We're at a completely different latitude, a completely different environmental season. However, the tradition is maintained. And so next slide. Here I'm showing you the cycle of Venus So in late May, it appears in the north, and that's beginning the rain cycle in Mesoamerica. And so when it appears in the north, the rains start coming in. And so Chalk, the rain god, his temple's oriented northwest, which is now towards this star that appears in the northwestern sky in its evening aspect to bring in the rains. Next slide. So here is Chalk, the rain god. That right picture, Chalk's doing a rain dance. In his right hand, he's holding his thunder axe. In his left hand, he's holding a ball that's actually a head. In the right image here, right in the center, you have Chalk. He's got like this deformed face, and he's holding a head below him, a decapitated head. His other hand, he's holding a knife. Do you see that?
No, dude.
Right behind him is a jaguar. So he's again paired with the lion deity. So here we have the head hunter Chalk bringing the reins, holding the head, holding the knife, paired with the lion. Next slide. Just interestingly enough, we have a lot of lion altars. That's what this right image is, where they would offer their offerings, including human sacrifices, to bring the rains. But you have these Mayan temples with these square tops with the entry into the other world in them. And it just reminded me of the square bucket of the oar headdress.
Right.
And we're wondering, could that be a stylized, perhaps coming from that culture group? We're going to put the top of our temple in this headdress in this way. Next slide. Again, another lion altar. This is the Yucatan. We have these square, sort of bucket cubic-like temples. Next slide. These are rain warriors. So this is in Kachlata. Jaguar figures. Their skin is painted blue because they bring the rain. That 5-petaled apron they're wearing, that white apron, is a symbol for Venus, and they're surrounded by these 5-pointed stars, which are Venus stars, and they're wearing a lion pelt, which is again associated with Venus. So here is your sun warrior related to rain, with the lion pelt, with the Venus symbols, who also take heads. Next slide. Here we have, these are incense burners, and they look really similar to our oar-headed figure petroglyph, in that the incense burner top is that conical sort of upside down bucket with feathers coming out the side. And they had various deities that they would make in these incense burners, and they would burn incense into them. The smoke would come up, and that represented the serpent of the universe. And you would bring in your divine powers by burning the incense. But several of these incense burners have headdresses that look very similar to our oar-headed figure. And so that too might be a connection as to where this headdress comes from. Could be the Maize solar god of an incense burner that was the prototype for that headdress. We don't know, but these are all part of the same agricultural complex of maize, head taking, and the Venus cycle. Next picture. Last year I was in Peru, and I was in Lima, and I went to their largest private museum. Oh, now the name of it is escaping me. It's a fantastic museum. Anyway, I was in there, and I ran across these. This left image is a nose plate. So you would put, their nose was pierced, and this is quite large, and it would cover, their nose and mouth when they wore it. But it just was interesting. It had these two oar-like protrusions, this conical, almost bucket shape. It's inverted, but that face in it is actually a lion. And so here I have what is, so the right image here, we have those oars, we have a jaguar in the center of it. And we have 8 beads, 8 turquoise beads, 4 on each side. I was looking at that and I was going, boy, that is really close. Really close. And that's really interesting. And then I read the plaque that described these objects, and it said these represent the Moche. This is pre-Inca, so this is Peru. The Moche decapitator god.
Hello.
This is their headhunter who takes the head for their agricultural cycle. And so I was like, holy cow, what is going on here? We have a highway of information going all the way up from South America, Mesoamerica, North America, with trade contacts. I'm not saying that this is actually, it's just really coincidental. Yeah. So I thought I would show it. Next slide. So here we have the 8-orbed necklace, the 5-orb necklace. We have 8 and 5 ringed spirals. Again, every 8 Earth years, you see Venus as the morning star 5 times. They're tracking that. And when Venus appears in the north, that brings the rains. So what do? Venus as morning star is your headhunter. You take a head, you might take it once every 5 years or once every 8 years, right? When Venus appears in the north, either as morning or evening star, to bring the power of the divine water into your agricultural cycle. So, what I can say then for sure, I mean, this is interpretation. What I can say is the oar head has raisin feathers. We find that in Mesoamerica. He has a pyramidal headdress form with an enclosure. That's interesting. He has a lion jaguar figure with rays coming out of it. Find that in Mesoamerica. We have a necklace and ear plates with 8-5 numerics. That is the Venus cycle. There are 2 lion attendants, and the entire panel is oriented to the northwest, which would be the rain star Venus as evening star in its northern position. Next slide. I'm going to skip that. Next slide. We're back to this solar shrine. And once I saw that, understood what I was looking at, I immediately recognized, next slide, that the petroglyphs have 2 spirals. The upper left one, do you see that, is an 8-ring spiral. The lower left one is a 5-ring spiral. Mm-hmm. And I was like, holy crap, there it is. Right next to the oar head, the 8-5-ring spiral, which brought me back to this solar shrine so that I could take a picture. Next slide. There's Venus underneath the prong, that bright white dot. So after sunset, summer solstice, the sunlight is subdued, and what appears underneath the rock prominence is Venus as evening star. Of course, that doesn't happen every night. That happens only periodically, right? When it appears as in its northern position. So that is what I think they're looking for. When that star appears there, they're doing their rain, a grand rains ritual to bring in the rains for the agricultural cycle. Next slide. So I'm just comparing the iconography we have from the post-classic Maya, Itzamna, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, all solar gods and Venus gods. They're associated with the jaguar, the evening star. The rain god is associated with Venus at head taking. Venus is associated with the rain. Warfare, sacrifice, head taking are all intermingled in these cultures. We go to the iconography of the Fremont that we've been looking at for the past 2 hours. We find the same iconography. And so that tells us that there's related cultural ideas between the 2 culture groups. Next slide. Again, our oar head has similarities to these. Next slide. We'll just burn through these. Our butte, our temples, our oar head, our conical top oar head all have similarities. Again, these temples with the entrances are entrances to the other world where you're bringing the divine powers in. That's exactly what's happening on top of Fajada Butte with that sun dagger calendar. And we think that's what is being represented here with the conical cap of the Oar-head figure. Next slide. We go back to this original image that we started with the sun chevron filling the head of this solar deity. And after, doing all the research, we realize, oh my gosh, the sunlight is literally taking the head. That's what's happening there. It's imbuing the head with the power of the sun, cosmicizing the head. And actually, if you look at that figure, right underneath his left arm, right underneath that curved staff, right next to his torso, is a dark shape that is mushroom shaped. And we didn't recognize that for 2 years when we realized, oh my gosh, there's a head underneath him. Yeah. He's got a head right underneath his curved arm. We didn't even know that until we went through, hundreds of miles of hiking, finding, photographing, doing all the research, going back to the sites and seeing, oh my gosh, the sunlight's taking his head. Oh my gosh, he actually has a head underneath his left arm. Next slide. So what we have then is a Maize Venus solar cosmovision where the entire agricultural cycle is being run by Sun and Venus and the rain rituals. And we find that basically Mesoamerica, South America, and now we're finding it in with the modern Fremont. So again, this is research original to our team. We're the first people to come out of Utah and say, hey, look at this. And so that's kind of exciting. What does it mean? Does it mean that the Maya migrated to, to present day Utah during that time period? Not necessarily. Again, it could be through trade information, trade contacts. It could be through forced migration, voluntary migration. We don't know, but we do know that there is a wide cultural sphere that is interrelating these images, the rituals, the iconography, the rainmaking, that all have these similarities. And I think that is my last slide. So what do you want to do next, Miguel? That's a lot of talking. That's 2 hours, 15 minutes. So,
oh no, we appreciate that. Is some great detective work, John. I mean, amazing stuff. I love it. Nate and I and many listeners of AM Byte, we were in Tulum. We're visiting some Mayan rituals this March during the solstice, and
nice.
We
did
our
make
thing.
It to Chichen Itza?
No, we didn't this time. Hope maybe next time, simply because of the bus ride and the time. So this is the vibe is in the air. We didn't run into Oar-head, or maybe we didn't recognize him, but we shall see if we do last time. No, it's really been fantastic. Great presentation. Just I will have it on the show notes, but please, this is John's book, Mythos and Cosmos. If you want to check out more on John, there's his website, John Lundwall.
It's actually johnklundwall.com.
Oh, it is. That's weird. I copy and pasted it from the browser.
Yeah, my original website got hacked and totally destroyed, and so I just rebuilt it. And I haven't taken down johnlundwall.com. It's johnklundwall.com. But that website's totally intact and actually has gorgeous pictures. I go around the world with an astral camera and take shots. So it can be fun to go through my gallery and look at some of my photography. I also have some of my research there, the Utah Cultural Astronomy Project, my book there, just research there. So
yeah, I highly recommend Mytho and Cosmos. So many great insights. Well, as we get to the end, Nate, do you any comments or final words?
I think you did a great job. I love the way that the light falls, impregnating the entire rock face like a talisman. I think that's a really potent part. If just to bring that back around to recapitulate, to remind people, that's a really good thing that you've added. So thank you for your presentation. You guys did a great job, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nathan.
Oh, Nathan Lee.
Nathan Lee. Thanks, Nathan Lee. I will say this. I've spent many early mornings, I mean, pre-dawn, setting up my camera and just standing in front of these sites and watching the sun do its thing on the rock imagery. And, you know, sometimes it's a hierophany. You know, you're out there by yourself. It's beautiful. The sun gives you lots of things, and you realize I'm looking at something that's 1,000 years old that no one has seen for 1,000 years. And what can I say? It's kind of like
amazing,
metaphysical heroin. It's awesome.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Yeah, put your thing on mute there, Nate.
Yeah, I think it's.
Well, awesome. Well, we are at the end. There's a lot to process. Even people in the chat are like, this is great. Let's just process so much information. But love your conclusions. Love your, again, your detective work and insights on this. And yeah, it's been a great show, John. And we certainly hope to have you on sooner rather than later.
Anytime, Miguel. Love to come on.
All right, for you, for everybody else, thanks for being here. I'll have the right web address in the show notes for the audio version. And of course, it will be available for YouTube right after this. And hope you've enjoyed this wonderful astrotheological ride. And again, Tuesday we'll have another show. This time we'll deal with the Anunnaki and their shenanigans. And then we will actually have a show on the Aztecs and their rituals dealing with mushrooms and sacrifices. So Mesoamerica,
nice.
Here we come. We ain't going anywhere, which is weird with a show about Gnosticism, but something told me this year to focus on our ancestors in this continent because they have a lot of good advice and stark warnings because, as John is saying, they had great civilizations that all went to shit, and we're getting close to that in this country. So we want to take their advice. We want to see what they were doing and take, you know, avoid their worst parts and maybe embrace their best parts. So, all right. Well, good night, everybody, and thanks for being here.
Good night.